Welcome to Mr. Beebop. Sherlock Holmes was a fictional character created by the Scottish writer Arthur Conan Doyle. As the world's first and only consulting detective, he pursued criminals throughout Victorian and Edwardian London, the south of England, and continental Europe. Here are 15 facts about the famous detective. Number 1. Sherlock Holmes was originally going to be called Sherrinford. The name was altered to Sherlock, possibly because of a cricketer who bore the name. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who created Holmes, was a fan of cricket, and the name Sherlock appears to have stuck in his memory. Number 2. Sherlock Holmes was based on a real-life lecturer and a fictional detective by Edgar Allan Poe. Doyle modeled Holmes' methods and mannerisms on those of a real-life lecturer of his at the University of Edinburgh, Dr. Joseph Bell, who could diagnose patients simply by looking at them when they walked into his surgery. The other important influence on the creation of Sherlock Holmes was C. Auguste Dupin, a fictional detective who appears in 3 stories by Edgar Allan Poe. Dupin is a Paris gentleman of leisure who, for his own amusement, uses analysis to help the police solve crimes. Number 3. The first Sherlock Holmes novel was something of a flop. The detective made his debut in the 1887 novel A Study in Scarlet, written by a 27-year-old Doyle in just 3 weeks. The novel was rejected by many publishers and eventually published in Beaton's Christmas Annual. It didn't sell well and more or less sank without trace. Number 4. Not much is known about Sherlock Holmes' family or background. In his Last Bow, set in 1914, Holmes is described as being 60, indicating that he was born in 1854. He lived in London at 221B Baker Street and shared rooms with Dr. Watson until the latter's marriage in 1887. And then again after his wife's death. His London abode is tended by his housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson. We do not know anything of Holmes's parents. He does mention, however, that his ancestors were country squires. He claims that his grandfather was the artist Horace Vernet, and we know that he has a brother, Mycroft, a civil servant, who is 7 years older than he is. Holmes worked as a detective for 23 years and retired in the Sussex Downs shortly before 1904. Number 5. Sherlock Holmes has essentially an obsessive personality. Sherlock Holmes works compulsively on all his cases. He is methodical, intelligent, analytical, observant, and reserved, but he has an ability to match his brooding, thoughtful nature with immediate action. Watson's narrations describe Holmes as a very complex and moody character, who, although of strict habit, is considerably untidy. Holmes appears to undergo bouts of mania and depression between cases, the latter of which are accompanied by pipe smoking, violin playing, and cocaine use. He has an in-depth knowledge of music and plays on a Stradivarius. He is also known to run chemistry experiments in his spare time, to the dismay of both Dr. Watson and Mrs. Hudson. he is not known to have had an intimate or amorous relation with a woman, and thinks of them as a distracting factor which might throw a doubt upon all his mental results. Number 6. Sherlock Holmes didn't wear a deerstalker much. The famous image of Holmes wearing a deerstalker hat is a product of the celebrated images which accompanied the short stories published in the Strand magazine from 1891. It is when the stories began to appear that Sherlock Holmes became a worldwide sensation. Sidney Paget, who drew the illustrations, had Holmes wearing a deerstalker when the detective went into the country to investigate mysteries at country houses and in small rural villages. But most people think of the detective as always donning the hat when off to investigate a case. Number 7. Much of the popular image of Holmes was the result of William Gillette. Gillette, an American actor, portrayed Holmes in over 1,300 stage performances and in a 1916 film now sadly lost. He wore the deerstalker cap on stage, thus helping further to cement the notion, begun largely with the illustrations, that Holmes frequently wore the hat. He was also responsible for popularizing the image of Holmes smoking the curved briar pipe. As a result, people tend to picture Holmes smoking a curved pipe instead of the straight ones he smoked in the stories and illustrations. Gillette reportedly opted for a curved pipe as it allowed him to recite his lines more easily, although it is more likely that he used a curved pipe because it was easier for the audience to see his face. Number 8. Sherlock Holmes is the most portrayed literary human character in film and TV. Having been depicted on screen 254 times, the Guinness Book of World Records awarded the world record to Sherlock Holmes for the most portrayed literary human character in film and TV. Since his creation in 1887, Sherlock Holmes has been played by over 75 actors. However, Sherlock is not the overall most portrayed literary character in film. That title belongs to the non-human character Dracula, who has been portrayed in 272 films. Number 9. The very first film adaptation to feature Holmes was made in 1900. The first attempt to bring Sherlock Holmes to the film medium was in the year 1900 with Sherlock Holmes Baffled. The silent film was not projected, but rather displayed in a mutoscope, a standalone box for a single person to view the images moving with the help of a hand crank. This short film is just 30 seconds in duration. The skit is a send-up of Holmes since the film uses then pioneering special effects to show the criminal eluding Holmes' detection. Nobody knows the identity of the actor who played Holmes. Number 10. Sherlock Holmes didn't make deductions. At least, not most of the time. Instead, and if we want to be technically accurate, he used a logical process known as abduction. The difference between deductive and abductive reasoning is that the latter is based more on inference from observation, where the conclusion drawn may not always necessarily be true. However, in deduction, the conclusion drawn from the available data is always necessarily true. But then again, since Holmes's reasoning always seems to be correct, perhaps it is deduction after all. Number 11. Holmes never says, Elementary, my dear Watson. Not in the original Conan Doyle novels and stories. Holmes says elementary and my dear Watson at various points, but the idea of putting them together was a later meme, which possibly arose because it neatly conveys Holmes's effortless superiority to his dear friend and foil. Number 12. The original name of Dr. Watson was ORMOND SACKER. In the early drafts for plot outlines, Doyle has Holmes' friend and sidekick named ORMOND SACKER rather than the altogether more common and humdrum John Watson. Doyle must have realized that Watson's everyman status was better served by a more down-to-earth and usual name and altered it. Which brings us to our next fact. Number 13. Dr. Watson's first name was John, except for one story. Watson's first name is mentioned on only 4 occasions. Part 1 of the first Sherlock Holmes story, A Study in Scarlet, is subtitled being a reprint from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, MD, late of the Army Medical Department. The preface of the collection, His Last Bow, is signed John H. Watson, MD. And in The Problem of Thor Bridge, Watson says that his dispatch box is labeled John H. Watson, MD. His wife Mary Watson appears to refer to her husband as James in The Man with the Twisted Lip. Number 14. Dr. Watson narrated all of the Sherlock Holmes stories? Not exactly. He narrates nearly all of them, but not quite all. 4 of the stories are not narrated by Watson. Of these 4, 2 are told in the third person, and 2, The Adventure of the Blanched Soldier and The Adventure of the Lion's Mane, are actually told by Holmes himself. Number 15. Sherlock Holmes was killed off and resurrected. Claiming that Holmes distracted him from better things, Conan Doyle famously in 1893, in The Final Problem, attempted to kill him off. During a violent struggle on Switzerland's Reichenbach Falls, both Holmes and his nemesis, Professor James Moriarty, are plunged over the edge of the precipice. Popular outcry against the demise of Holmes was great. Men wore black mourning bands. The British royal family was distraught, and more than 20,000 readers cancelled their subscriptions to the popular Strand magazine, in which Holmes regularly appeared. By popular demand, Conan Doyle resurrected his detective in the story The Adventure of the Empty House in 1903. Thank you for watching. See you again next time.